Okay, welcome back to the next part of the video. And this video is another installment in my Absolute Beginner Guide. This is a video series that I'm putting together that has a special emphasis on people who are brand new to Orbiter. You've downloaded the program, you've got it installed, and you've verified that it does work, but you really don't know how to do anything with it. This video series, this Absolute Beginner Guide series, helps people learn how to do things that are fun and useful with Orbiter. Now, I am assuming that you're watching these videos in order, so if you happen to be coming onto my channel and this is the first time you've ever seen one of my videos, go ahead and stop this video, go all the way back to Absolute Beginner Guide number 1, and work your way forward. That's necessary because the concepts and ideas that we cover out here at this point are going to be a bit too complicated and over your head, and you won't understand anything I'm talking about if you haven't seen all the previous videos. Now, having said that, let's go ahead and jump back into the next part here where we're going to the moon and landing on a target base. Now, in the previous video, we were all the way out to the moon already, but we did our orbit insertion burn. It's called the LOI burn, the Lunar Orbit Insertion Burn. And we finished finalizing a little bit of base alignment with Brighton Beach, and we got our navigation equipment set up so that we are on target with Brighton Beach, and we're getting ready to land. We're only 2,000 kilometers away from the base, and things happen quite quickly at this point. So let's go ahead and unpause the simulation. Now, landing much in the same way landing on Earth is a lot of hands-on experience. I could show you 10 examples, 20 examples, but you're really never going to know how to do it very well until you just get your hands on Orbiter and you do it yourself. There's a lot of very quick thinking that has to happen, and you have to basically have these processes memorized. You don't have enough, there's not enough time to really think about what you have to do, so you kind of have to know how to do it ahead of time. You know, can't really think of a good analogy off the top of my head, but just the point I'm trying to get at is that there's only so much you can get out of an Absolute Beginner Guide when it comes to landing on the moon. Eventually you just have to sit down and do it yourself until you're familiar with it. Having said that, I'll go through the process as best I can and give you various helpful hints for the timing issues and other things that hopefully will help you out with your landings. So there's really nothing we can do until we're within 500 kilometers or so. So let's go ahead and warp time forward to that point. And the distance here, according to map MFD, is 1,500. So I'm just warping time forward. And got our distance call out, just letting us know how high up above the moon's surface we are. It said 2,500 kilometers, but we also have that information here. Altitude's now 1,900. Okay, now as we get into here, where things start happening very quickly, so let's bring up the VOR VTOL, and this will come online just in a couple seconds when we're within 500 kilometers.
Rotation.
And let's go to rotation, and let's rotate so that we are belly down toward the planet, or heads up, might be another way of saying it. So I start by having the orbit HUD up so that I can make sure that I'm on the center line. And by center line, I mean if I were like this, I'm not on the center line. Or if I'm like this, I'm not on the center line. So I want orbit HUD to be up just long enough so that I can make sure that I'm centered like that. Now I want to switch to surface. Now I don't know where the center position is anymore because that straight vertical line is gone. But I can tell, you know, I'm not going to drift off position by much. But I do want to have surface up at this point. Now we will take a beginner's approach to landing on the moon, which is going to be wasting a lot of fuel, but as you get better, your timings will improve and you won't have to waste as much fuel. But I feel like if we try to do this as fuel efficiently as possible, our hands are just way too busy and it's too difficult for the absolute beginner to wrap their head around. If you ever need to check again to make sure if you're on the center position, center line, just H a couple times and you can see we still are. This won't change because there's no atmosphere to speak of on the moon. so we're not having any aerodynamic effects, so there's really no reason that we should ever yaw left or right. So we can pretty much keep surface HUD up at this point. Okay, now this MFD came online, and we can see that, let me go ahead and go down to 0.1, so we're now, time is accelerating 1/10 of a second per second, and that's just so that I can explain some stuff here. As we're getting closer to the base, this yellow arrow indicates our direction of flight, and this green line indicates where the base is actually at. We're currently a little bit off target. In order to be perfectly on target, we need this yellow arrow to be pointing exactly at the direction of that green line. So before we get any closer, we want to start making a little bit of a base correction as soon as possible, because the closer we get, first of all, we just simply run out of time as we get closer, but also the farther out we are from the base, the more difference these corrections make. So let's go back to real time.
Translation.
And with just a little bit of lateral translation, actually I don't even think translation's going to be quick enough. It's
Rotation.
not. So we'll yaw off center a little bit. About 45 degrees should do it. And as I put in just a little bit of engine, you can see that yellow line is getting more lined up with the green, like that.
Translation. Rotation.
Now I want to rotate back around. I overshot a little bit. It tends to happen. And I just want to get things lined up like that. Now, basically what I'm looking at here, let me go back to 0.1. Now the yellow arrow is pointing basically directly at that straight green line, so I'm more or less exactly on target with Brighton Beach. And if I want, I can bring up Map MFD and zoom way in, and I can use this as a reference as well. But this is more accurate. It's difficult to tell how well lined up you are just by looking at that line. This is far more accurate. Notice when I did that burn, I also brought my velocity down a little bit. So I'm currently descending into the planet, into the moon at this point. So I need to keep an eye on my vertical speed. Now, something the absolute beginner can do and should do, so that you don't have to worry about cratering into the moon. If you press hold altitude, what that does is, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It holds your altitude. It zeroes out your vertical speed. And you also want to press L to level the horizon so that your ship will stay level. This is just so that you have less stuff to think about. This is not the most efficient way to do it, but it gives you less things to have to do manually. So currently we have the level horizon on, and we have the attitude, we have the hold altitude autopilot on. So the two things I don't have to worry about, I don't have to worry about the vessel pitching up and down, and I don't have to worry about my altitude sinking and crashing into the moon. Notice that my altitude is 1,367 meters, and my vertical speed is basically 0. So this is what I recommend doing for the absolute beginner, is to just get your vertical speed, to 0, so you don't have to think about the up-down part. What we do have to worry about, though, is our distance to the base, to the landing pad more specifically, and how soon we want to begin the braking burn. I'm going back to 0.1 so I can further explain. Again, this is just something that requires calculations in order to do it efficiently. But for the absolute beginner, the way to begin braking when you get close to the base is similar to what we did when closing in on the ISS, and similar to what we did when closing in on the periapsis at lunar orbit insertion. It's just trial and error. Just apply some engine to see what happens, and then, so we're currently 200 kilometers out. Let's see what happens when we get to 200 kilometers if we apply the full power of the main engines. Okay, we can see the distance is coming down. That's the horizontal speed here. But we can see, or rather, we can see our horizontal speed coming down, but our distance is coming down. You know, you can sort of eyeball it and see that these numbers aren't matching up very well. So we're slowing down too soon. If we slow down to 0 at this point, we have 160 kilometers still to go. That's a lot of distance to cover if you're going to hover all the way there. So we want to begin braking later on in the process. So let's see what happens at 100 kilometers. Let's get our distance down to 100 kilometers. And then we will once again apply the full power of the main engines and see what happens. And we can also kind of keep an eye on our position here just to make sure that we're not getting off track. But for the most part, we're lined up, so we'll just keep an eye on the distance. And you can just get a feel for it. How quickly are these numbers ticking by? Again, we're going to wait till we're at about 100 kilometers. And now we'll apply the full power of the main engines and see what happens. Okay, we can see the distance is closing in. But these things just, if you sort of eyeball it, it just feels like we're slowing down a little too early. We're still 85 kilometers out. That's a long way to go. So let's go ahead and kill the engines, and let's get in a little closer. You can see here in orbit at MFD, you know, our orbit is definitely, you know, it's not an orbit anymore. We're going to crash into the moon at some point. Of course, we've got the hover engines automatically enabled to make our life a little bit easier.
Translation, rotation.
If we want, we can also yaw a little bit again this way. Actually, it's going to be the other way this time. And that'll correct our yellow line, get it a little bit closer to the green. And we're also getting close to the point now where we need to use the full power of the main engines for the braking. We're still 30 kilometers out. Okay, you can see our yellow arrows pointing exactly toward the green. So let's slow things down a little bit more. We're still 25 kilometers out. And we're slowing down too quickly, too soon. So let's go ahead and just get in a bit closer. We're 18 kilometers out, 17. Let's apply the main engines again when we're at 10 kilometers. And now let's switch to nav 2, because we're going to land on the landing pad. We're not going to land on the center of the base, we're going to land on the landing pad. And this feels like a pretty good number now. You can see we're 5 kilometers out. We're moving at 300 meters per second. Things are lining up. We're at 2 kilometers and 200 meters per second, so we're pretty well at this point. 1.5 kilometers, 100 meters per second. Okay, now we're 1.3 kilometers out. Let's go ahead and get all the way down to 1 kilometer, and now let's just zero out our velocity. Okay, you can see our horizontal speed is it's actually 3.65, and you'll notice now that the green line's over here and the yellow line's over here. If we press F1 and take a look at the external camera, we can see that we're at the base. We're mostly stopped. We're only moving at 3 meters per second. And we got the hover engines on, automatically holding us at this altitude so we don't have to worry about crashing into the surface. So how then do we actually land on the landing pad? Well, what we need to do is, again, we need to line up this yellow arrow with the green arrow, with the green line. What I like to do is to have the landing pad in front of my viewpoint. And the way that we get the landing pad in front of our viewpoint is by going to rotation, and we can just rotate one way or the other until this green line is straight ahead of us, and that will mean that the landing pad from our perspective is straight in front of us. And the reason I like to have it straight in front of us is because it makes all the movements easier to understand. Left is left, right is right, forward is forward, and backward is backwards. If you have the green arrow here or here or here, then you have to compensate in your mind for which direction you're moving. So let's get that centered. Now let's switch to translation, and let's use lateral translation, which is 3. That's pushing the yellow arrow to the right. And then 6, which is forward translation. That's bringing the arrow forward. And again, remember, we want the arrow to be pointing toward that green line, which it now is. And I can see that the green line's a little bit off from the center.
Rotation.
So I'm going to rotate till that's perfectly centered. And you can actually see when it's perfectly centered because that overlays that white perfectly. Now we're moving forward at a measly 0.93 meters per second. That's a little too slow. That would take us a very long time to get to landing pad number 1, and we would waste a ton of fuel. So just using translation thrusters, and that's actually, I've got it on rotation. So just using translation thrusters, I'm going to move forward at just say 10 meters a second. When you're this close to the landing pad, you don't want to move quickly. You want everything to be slow. So remember, all the velocity that we put in, we have to take back out. So the more velocity we add in, the more we have to take back out. So 10 meters a second is as fast as I would go at this point. And I'm going to shut this MFD off because we don't need it anymore. And we're now 850 meters from the center of the pad. And we can see we're moving slowly, but we're getting there. Again, this is not a good way to land. It's slow, it's inefficient, it's using a lot of fuel, but this is something that the beginner, the absolute beginner, can wrap their head around. Now we're only 600 meters from the center of the pad. Now we're about 550 meters, and you can see, we're getting there. It just takes a bit of time. If we right-click out here, we can kind of scroll down and look at our landing pad. Of course, we lose our HUD, and the way we can get everything back is by pressing the home key. So home recenters everything and gives us our HUD back. Now we're 360 meters out. Let's slow things down a little bit. Let's put in some reverse translation, 9. Let's slow things down to 7 meters a second. That's just an arbitrary number. There's nothing special about it. You can see that these concentric circles are starting to light up. We're getting in closer. Our green is a bit off, so let's rotate slightly so that that's perfectly centered like that. And let's translate the yellow arrow over. We're only 150 meters out. Let's slow all the way down to just 2 meters a second. Relatively arbitrary number again. If you did your docking procedure, then you can tell that this is not completely dissimilar from docking. Okay, we've slowed down quite a bit. Let's translate to get everything centered. Okay, we're now 45 meters from the center of the pad. We could actually, anytime you're within 20 meters of the pad, you can actually go ahead and touch down. You don't have to be at 0.00. 20 meters is inside the pad. So now we're 25 meters. Let's slow things down even more. Let's go all the way down to 1 meter a second. And when we get down to, say, 10 meters a second, we'll try to basically zero out our velocity. Okay, 10 meters. Let's go ahead and slow things down. And now we're going to want to start using control translation. Okay, we're 6 meters from the center of the pad. And again, don't focus too much on getting your distance to 0.00 because you'll just waste fuel. So let's go ahead and zero out our velocity. We're close enough. So I'm just control 9. And maybe a little bit of control 1 to zero out the lateral. Okay, now let's take a look at our situation. We are basically straight above the landing pad and we're hovering thanks to the altitude hold autopilot. And we would basically hover at this point until we ran out of fuel, in which case we would descend and crash into the landing pad. We don't want to crash into the landing pad, we want to touch down on the landing pad, so let's now transition into the vertical descent. Now, the position will not hold precisely at one point, whatever you have it. It will drift slightly because the engines aren't perfectly capable of holding the craft exactly in place. So every now and then, you might want to take a look at your horizontal speed and just do any translations that are necessary to make sure that that's close to 0.00. Now we want to turn off the hold altitude. Actually, let's go ahead and lower the landing gear now, just so that we have one less thing to think about. Normally I would do that when I'm closer to the ground, but we'll just go ahead and take care of it now so that we don't have to worry about it later. And let's turn off the hold. And now we're going to start either dropping or ascending. Looks like at this point we're ascending because we still have whatever hover hold the autopilot had. So I'm pressing the period key on the numeric keypad, and I can see now that my vertical speed, I can see my vertical speed is increasing. And that's fine because we do want to get lower, so we're now dropping, but we're dropping very slowly. We're at 1.3 kilometers. So we just want to drop straight down to the pad at this point. And we don't want to let our vertical speed get too high, but we don't necessarily need to keep it really low at this point because we got a ways to drop. We've got over a kilometer to fall. So we can just kind of press F1 and we can maybe look and see what's happening. We're descending on the pad. Horizontal speed is still 0.00, so we're not really drifting, too much. We will drift slightly one way or the other because the craft just isn't capable of holding itself perfectly in position. We're now down to about a kilometer, getting close to that point. Notice our vertical speed still increasing, so that means we're falling faster and faster with each second. So we want to watch that. We want to be careful that we don't fall too fast. But we've still got a ways to go, so we need to just continue to let ourselves descend. If you get scared, if you think things are happening too fast, press the 0 key on your numeric keypad a couple times. That will add in some additional hover. And notice my vertical speed is now getting closer to 0. But don't do too much because then you'll start to climb, and you don't want to climb. So now my vertical speed's all the way down to 1.6 meters per second. I'm going to go ahead and press the period key a couple times because I want to drop a little bit faster. Just because I have enough experience that I don't want to take all day doing this. Still dropping onto the pad. Normally at 500 meters, that's when I usually listen for to extend the landing gear. That's the call out that I listen for. Now we're falling at 15 meters a second. If this number is scaring you, again, press the 0 key a few times to add in some additional hover so you can slow down your vertical descent. It gets a little tricky toward the end because what we actually have to do is we have to transition to use translation thrusters. So now we're descending onto the pad, and this is a good descent rate. We're less than a meter per second, but notice that we're continually increasing our descent. What we can do at this point is we can start using just translation thrusters. So get away from using 0 and period and start using 8 and 2. So if I want to descend a little faster, I'll press 8. But if I want to descend a little slower, now I'll press 2. And we really want to touch down on the landing pad at maybe 1 meter a second or less. So like 0.8, something like that. Or if you really want to be really fine about it, you could be all the way down to like 0.2. We've got a ways to go, so I'm going to push 8. That'll make me descend a little bit faster. But the hover engines are at a good place. I don't want to add any more hover. I don't want to take away any more hover, because the hover engines are keeping me at a good sync. We're at 100 meters. Let's go outside. Our distance from the center of the pad is 1.36. Our horizontal speed's 0.01. This is a very small number. We're not going to worry about it. We're descending at 3 meters a second. That's a little too fast, so let's press 2 and hold it to
50.
decrease our sink. But we don't want to go too low quite yet, because
40.
we've still got a few meters to fall. We're almost there.
30.
Okay, let's go down to just 1 meter a second. Now I'm just using translation. 20 meters. Now we're falling very slow at this point. I could just let go and everything will be fine. It's just a little bit more, 10 meters. Okay, we're almost down. Now, hands off. Nothing doing. We're just going to let the vessel descend. If we want, we can tap 2 a couple more times here just before wheels stop, or before wheels are down, just to make sure we're good and slow. And there the wheels are down. Now, as soon as the wheels are down, you want to make sure you turn, you want to make sure you press the period key on the keyboard to turn the hover engines all the way off. Notice the hover engines are now 0.00, and if you have any other autopilots on, turn those off now as well. Now the vessel is completely stopped, and here we are at the moon. Very well centered. We're only 1.97 meters from the center of the pad. Again, if you're anywhere within 20 meters, then you'll be on the pad, and in my opinion, if you are anywhere in the vicinity of Brighton Beach on your first attempt, then you have done a very good job of getting out to the moon. I think for most people, you know, without a fairly decent set of instructions, the very first time they land on the moon, they're probably not even going to be anywhere near Brighton Beach. They're going to overshoot it by 1,000 kilometers or something crazy like that. So if you've managed to get to the moon and land on any landing pad, even if it wasn't the one that you intended to land on, or even if you landed on the building by mistake or out here or anywhere even close to the base, then you've done a very, very good job, and you should feel proud of yourself. Again, it's very satisfying each time you do something new for the first time. Okay, so I think that basically covers everything for you know, getting from the Earth to the moon. That's at least as much detail as I can possibly imagine that I could get into. If you like the video, go ahead and hit the like button. That's always appreciated. And if you like the content, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Check out all my other videos as well. I've got tons of videos about, you know, going to Mars and exploring some of the other planets. And coming up in one of the next installments of the Absolute Beginner Guide, I don't know for sure what the very next one will be, but here soon we're going to talk about going from the Earth to Mars. Maybe before we do that, we'll go from the moon back to the Earth. I also want to talk more about the ISS and stuff like that. So I'm really not sure what I'm going to do next. So we'll just see. And with that said, I will see you in the next video. The timing issues and other things that hopefully will help you out with your landings. So there's really nothing we can do until we're within 500 kilometers or so. So let's go ahead and warp time forward to that point. And the distance here, according to map MFD, is 1,500. So I'm just warping time forward. And got our distance call out, just letting us know how high up above the moon's surface we are. It said 2,500 kilometers, but we also have that information here. Altitude's now 1,900. Okay, now as we get into here, where things start happening very quickly, so let's bring up the VOR VTOL, and this will come online just in a couple seconds when we're within 500 kilometers.
Rotation.
And let's go to rotation, and let's rotate so that we are belly down. A lot of hands-on experience. I could show you 10 examples, 20 examples, but you're really never going to know how to do it very well until you just get your hands on orbiter and you do it yourself. There's a lot of very quick thinking that has to happen, and you have to basically have these processes memorized. You don't have enough, there's not enough time to really think about what you have to do, so you kind of have to know how to do it ahead of time. You know, can't really think of a good analogy off the top of my head, but just the point I'm trying to get at is that there's only so much you can get out of an absolute beginner guide when it comes to landing on the moon. Eventually you just have to sit down and do it yourself until you're familiar with it. Having said that, I'll go through the process as best I can and give you various helpful hints for that if you haven't seen all the previous videos. Now, having said that, let's go ahead and jump back into the next part here where we're going to the moon and landing on a target base. Now in the previous video we were all the way out to the moon already, but we did our orbit insertion burn. It's called the LOI burn, the lunar orbit insertion burn. And we finished finalizing a little bit of base alignment with Brighton Beach, and we got our navigation equipment set up so that we are on target with Brighton Beach, and we're getting ready to land. We're only 2,000 kilometers away from the base, and things happen quite quickly at this point. So let's go ahead and unpause the simulation. Now, landing much in the same way landing on Earth is or the planet, or heads up, might be another way of saying it. So I start by having the orbit HUD up so that I can make sure that I'm on the center line. And by center line, I mean if I were like this, I'm not on the center line. Or if I'm like this, I'm not on the center line. So I want orbit HUD to be up just long enough so that I can make sure that I'm centered like that. Now I want to switch to surface. Now I don't know where the center position is anymore because that straight vertical line is gone, but I can tell, I'm not going to drift off position by much. But I do want to have surface up at this point. Now we will take a beginner's approach to landing on the moon, which is going to be wasting a lot. Okay, welcome back to the next part of the video. And this video is another installment in my absolute beginner guide. This is a video series that I'm putting together that has a special emphasis on people who are brand new to Orbiter. You've downloaded the program, you've got it installed, and you verified that it does work, but you really don't know how to do anything with it. This video series, this absolute beginner guide series, helps people learn how to do things that are fun and useful with Orbiter. Now I am assuming that you're watching these videos in order, so if you happen to be coming onto my channel and this is the first time you've ever seen one of my videos, go ahead and stop this video, go all the way back to Absolute Beginner Guide number 1, and work your way forward. That's necessary because the concepts and ideas that we cover out here at this point are going to be a bit too complicated and over your head, and you won't understand anything I'm talking about.